Gosh, hi everyone. My name is Brodie. I'm finishing up my undergrad at Goddard College. I got involved with the program explicitly just to build a practice out of counseling psychology using LARP. So right now I work for a campaign game, and my specific role on staff is doing lead management and leading debriefs following game. There wasn't really a structure for that before I became involved with the community, and that's been just a personal way of engaging while I'm completing my degree to make sure that this sort of consciousness is being built in very accessible games, like American campaign games. So I did a debrief, or a literature review. This is going through the JSTOR and EBSCO databases, as well as NordicLARPing.org articles, and the Canute Bunked and WeirdCon companion texts to find articles relative to debrief. Debriefing is a practice held in diverse fields that has different meanings, and establishing it in LARP has been practiced over the past 10 years, but for people who are trying to educate themselves on what this is and what it looks like, in addition to clarifying for those who are already practicing, the resources at hand aren't very concise. So, let's see. Debriefing is best broken down by the practices that inform it and that it shares practice with, then saying what it doesn't do and what it shouldn't be used for, or rather, what it is, what it is like, and then what shouldn't be expected of a debrief practice. So, starting first with Jacob Moreno, the practice of psychodrama and sociodrama was the origin of, well, his work is the origin of role-playing as a concept. And with that came a clarification of roles and relationships to be enacted, followed by a reflective period. In psychodrama, that's done with the individual's world enacted upon a group of actors. In sociodrama, that's done using a commonality of roles in problem solving. So in certain instances, that would be perhaps between, when it was practiced, was perhaps between striking workers and a petty bourgeois class that was directly responsible for them. And that came by using what we now would think of as meta techniques to exchange roles of perspective and then create a period of clarification following the enactment to create information and clarify terms about the first-hand experience of being involved with the sociodrama. Similarly, Moreno's work informed group therapy, which has a distinct practice known as process commentary, which is handled in a debrief-like setting, where in the process of group therapy, one's social behaviors is enacted, or are enacted within the group, and then those processes are commented on in a safe way, a corrective and reflective way, to be able to give words to what is otherwise automatic. Also, sharing lineage with LARP debrief is psychological debriefing. That takes a lot of different forms, including psychological first aid, and is used in critical incident stress management. That's what happens following some sort of disaster scenario or massive life change in which one experiences trauma or removal of agency. These practices aren't to be therapeutic, but to create a sense of safety, reinstitute a safe context, and then provide further work. That may be diagnostic, that may be making resources available, but in psychological debriefing, the people involved have been in a situation where they've lost control and are then being assisted to affect greater healing. This is particularly relevant to LARP debriefing because, we'll get to this later, studies done on psychological debriefing in the past 10 years have created discourse that doubts the effectiveness of it and its ability to potentially create harm. Those same studies have been cited in the practice of LARP debriefing and questioning its efficacy. We'll get to that. Additionally, it's similar to simulation debriefing, which is a period following an enactment in which there is a educationally constructive experience following. When following a simulation, a participant or a group of participants are brought together to socially exchange information, beginning with the affective, how the situation made them feel, moving to their cognitive processes, and then through facilitation, through a qualified facilitator, correcting those experiences and questioning the processes that led to the outcomes of the simulation. In that way, one can not only create meaningful information about what has happened in the simulation, but also have that information handled correctly and progressively through a qualified teacher. So these are all things that are distinct from LARP debriefing and necessarily need to be pointed out as a relief to why we debrief when we're using LARP. So, LARP debriefing is specifically a structured form of separating from characters, talking about group emotions, validating each other, and correcting relationships following an enactment. Dual process theory says that there are a suite of automatic information processes that we have when we are engaged with something. And part of why LARPing feels very real to us. Those types of processing are usually associated with sensory information. The other form of processing we have is a single system of executive processing, which we use to instill significance and re-signify the things around us, especially in an enactment like this, to maintain a sense of authenticity. So there are some rules for LARP debriefing, specifically because we're usually talking about emotions and characters we put on. Speaking about our emotions and speaking about how other people have affected us using the third person with the effect of separating one's actions within the diegetic space of the LARP from themselves as a person persistently. Like other forms of debrief, it's facilitated in such a way that the burden of continuing the debrief and making sure that the rules of the debrief are being followed is taken off of those who are debriefing so that they are free to engage with the debriefing process. Let's see. So it also moves in rounds of increasing intimacy, moving from singular communication and a dyad, and then moving out to a group. It's also a period in which one can give verbal processing and social validation to the events that happen within their game. In this way, one can do a bit of self-diagnosis and become aware of the skills that they're teaching themselves or the vulnerabilities brought up in roleplay. This is particularly useful, which is why we debrief in handling bleed, which is when some sort of emotional stimulation has happened in us that has gone too far. In obvious ways, that may look like crying when one doesn't want to be crying, but can also take on cognitive aspects, like an over-involvement with trying to solve problems on one character's behalf. These types of things get, again, some verbal processing in a debrief setting that lets people reflect on what has happened to them, what they've learned from the experience, and what they stand to learn by continuing to investigate the feelings that were allowed to come up within the reality of the game. Debrief is also integral to LARP design. That's something that hasn't caught on with everyone. But because we are creating this temporary reality in which we are making an enactment, we are agreeing together to go and, to treat each other in a certain way and to agree upon certain conditions for play. That requires some ramping up in order to build the trust necessary to maintain that reality, and also some aftercare. This is what defines debriefing as a transitional tool and singular concept for a LARP. And that's all to say that debriefing is not therapeutic, and it is not a place for making long-term emotional corrective work. It's a source of identifying, perhaps through a facilitator, triggers and goals that can be met following an enactment, but is not a place for treating these problems. In an analogy, it might be thinking of as like a seatbelt in a car, but the speed of the car is going to determine how hurt you get in an accident. In that same way, content has a large role in what we experience in terms of psychological distress from a LARP, and some discourse holds that debriefing is a safety measure, and that's, while it is, it does not absolve a game of distressing or traumatic content. It cannot be held to the same standards of harm as held in psychological debrief. The studies that have shown psychological debrief to be harmful in the debrief discourse have shown those studies to have been misconducted. The first thing that comes to mind is that most of those debriefs were not held socially. They were also for events that couldn't have happened socially. There's one in particular about burn victims, where their debrief was held within the 2 or 3 weeks following their event, in which they were re-traumatized, which is a nebulous concept, but one that's still present within in the literature, by being brought back to that trauma. A situation dissimilar from LARP because they were out of control of that situation, harmed in that situation, and also alone in the reconstruction and validation of that situation. And also, this is something that needs to be clarified, because in some of the accessible resources on LARP debriefing online, there is sometimes, in some it's said, in others it isn't, that it's a time for talking about game design and what really happened within a game. LARP debrief is not for that conversation. That is something that can happen with designers following play, and is inappropriate. And including, it's valuable. Developing a definition is going to be helpful for everyone.